This is Still Enrolled.
Is Cinderella dead, or is the slipper still fit? That is the question right now engulfing college basketball. We are bringing that question to college football. I'll give you my answer right now. I think Cinderella is alive. I've identified one team that could wear the slipper a la Indiana in 2024. Here in 2025, we'll break that down. We got Jake Trotter of ESPN joining us here as well to talk about some Cinderella stories, some spring football, Big Ten storylines as well. Speaking of which, we got some intel for you coming out of spring practices, some news, some notes from a few teams that we think is pertinent for you to know. So we'll share that here as well. Tripp, as you can tell, man, we got ourselves a great pod here.
I'm looking forward to this. It's the off season, but there's always a storyline. It's college football. It's something that's great to talk about. Really have enjoyed watching March Madness, and I think that kind of spurred our thought process going into the podcast today, where look, and I think it's still a small sample size, and I'm not going to take this down the road of college basketball. I probably watched about 3 college basketball games all year long prior to March Madness. But the conversation is with the NIL era and with the transfer portal, these small schools that have always made runs. I think it's a little bit different in college basketball. Like, I don't know that. And it's interesting. Like, do you consider some Big East schools smaller schools now because they don't have some of the Power 4, Power 5 resources that are like a Villanova? Is that truly like where do they fit? Where's a Gonzaga fit? Right. That's a conversation for another day, but maybe your Drakes of the world, your VCUs of the world, McNeese State, like, can these teams make a viable run in the new world of college basketball because of NIL and the transfer portal, where previously a Steph Curry is going to stay at Davidson? Well, now if Steph Curry has a really good NCAA tournament at Davidson, he's probably at Duke the next season. You know, maybe he's Seth Curry instead of Steph Curry in that spot. So does that translate over to college football where it's the haves and the have-nots? Maybe not even like a Boise State having an opportunity, but can a Purdue in the Big Ten? Can a Rutgers in the Big Ten? Can a Minnesota even in the Big Ten? Is there really any viable way for these schools to compete with the Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigans, USCs of the world? And I think it's an interesting conversation as you dive into it with all the dynamics at play.
Well, I guess it also depends on, like, when you talk about like compete, are we talking about like making a playoff spot, which I think is probably fairly the equivalent, right, for college football in terms of Cinderella versus college basketball? I think absolutely. Like we just saw the Indiana, right? They came out of nowhere, 11-1 in the regular season. Kirksey came in and used a lot of what people are trying to blame for the death of Cinderella in college basketball to build his own Cinderella story in Bloomington in 2024, where he took a lot of transfers. And just as easy as it is, if we saw Purdue's roster get raided by other Big Ten teams and other national programs this past offseason, just as easy as it is to lose players, it's also easy to replace them and gain players. I think Indiana is kind of the poster boy for that. And I think it's sustainable in the sense of, like, there's a lot of factors at play, and part of what helped Indiana was their schedule discrepancy as well. But that's a big storyline we've talked about now for a while. When you have these 16-team, 18-team conferences, every single year, there are going to be some teams that get screwed by a schedule where they have 3, 4, 5 of the hardest opponents. And other teams, just based on luck of the draw, are going to have maybe the easiest schedule where they miss the top 4 or 5 teams in your conference. I think in college football, if we just say, hey, can you make the college football playoff? Maybe win a college football playoff game. I think Cinderella and college football is still alive.
Well, Freddie Mercury, Tom Selleck, Raleigh Fingers, whatever you want to go with here. We can't ignore the elephant in the room, or should I say the caterpillar in the room?
Do you like the stash or no? For those listening on the podcast, I have shaved my beard for a bachelor party I just was on, and I'm rocking only a mustache that I guess is probably the closest you can compare it to Freddie Mercury. Is that fair to say?
It is. I mean, it is a well-defined, firm. It's, you got that thick, dark head of hair and, usually a nice, solid, filled-in beard, but it is a mustache that goes, for those listening, it goes from lip to lip, and it's even got a little bit of a downward arc on it on the sides. I mean, you really leaned into that bit. What does the girlfriend think?
She hates it. I don't mind it, honestly. It's, as George and Jerry would say from Seinfeld, I feel like I'm on a vacation for myself right now. And so there'll be times when I forget that I have it, and I'll go in the mirror like, oh yeah, that's right, I have a mustache. I would keep it a little longer if she didn't despise it and basically beg every day for it to be shaved down now. So I'm at least holding out hope, and she's agreed that as the beard grows in, I can keep the mustache until it's kind of about close, and then we can, do some manicuring to make it look all filled in again. But she absolutely hates it, absolutely despises it.
I can't remember the last time. I can't remember the last time you were clean shaven.
College probably. It's been a very long time, and this
back
is the second time I've worn a mustache.
Sports beat, right?
That's right, where you ran a strict ship, and it was you were like the Yankees. Come in, collared shirt, clean shaven, buzz cut, no hair on the collar. Brian Tripp, ladies and gentlemen, back now to age ourselves a decade ago. Woo! Boy, that guy had it was a strict ship, that's for sure.
I think it's impressive. It looks good. It makes you more distinguished, in my opinion.
It's about 50-50. A few people love it. A few people definitely hate it. So I'm gonna put you in the chalk side here, or in the side of a win. Chalk it up. More people love it than hate it. Thank you, Tripp.
I completely forget the question, so let's roll into who we have as our potential Cinderella teams.
Let's do it. All right, I'm looking at Washington here for a few reasons. We talked about Damon Williams and his rise. I get it. It's a small sample size, but look at the two games he started end of the year against two solid opponents in Oregon and Louisville. He completed 83% of his passes, 43 of 52, 575 total passing yards. He had 6 touchdowns, just 1 interception, and his passer rating was 213, which would have been the highest of all Big Ten quarterbacks. Now I get it. 2 games, very small sample size. But I think there is reason to believe he can have a big leap here in 2025 and really take off for Washington. You also have some talent around him. Jonah Coleman, 1,000-yard running back. He's returning. Denzel Boston, veteran receiver, 9 touchdowns, over 800 yards last year. So you have some experience at some key positions. And Tripp, we've talked about with Indiana, schedule discrepancy, schedule breaks here. Washington has the 3 toughest games at home in Ohio State, Illinois, Oregon. In order for them to be a Cinderella here and make the playoff, they got to go, I think, at worst 1-2 in those games. But here's the good news for Husky fans. They've won 20 straight home games. Washington has. Their last home loss was back in 2021, the finale to Washington State in the Apple Cup. So you're looking at now one of the best home teams recently in all the Big Ten with their 3 biggest opponents at home on the season, including which, by the way, the Ohio State game in late September, for all the roster turnover we talked about, inexperience. Yes, they play Texas, so it's a big start for them there, and they're used to playing a big game, but that's their first road game of the season here for the Buckeyes. So we'll see how they react in a hostile environment. They also have 2 road games at Michigan, at Wisconsin. But you look at it from Washington's perspective with the quarterback talent, some of the returning production they have at running back and receiver, and that team just being absolutely dominant and undefeated the last 3 seasons at home and having their 3 biggest games at home. I feel like Washington right now don't look to be a 10-2 team right there on the cusp of college football playoff contention.
For me, and for this exercise, I felt it was unfair to include USC and Michigan and probably even Nebraska in this exercise as a true sleeper dark horse underdog team. I think those are the teams we've spent a lot of time discussing the last 2-3 podcasts about what is their perspective for the 2025 season because of the long-term viability you feel like those programs have because of the resources at their disposal and their history. So trying to go a little bit further off the radar here, I'm going with Iowa because, and I know I've talked about it multiple times, and you found that ESPN actually had Iowa as their off the radar team that could emerge as a college football contender. And I'll be honest, before I even clicked on the document, the Google Doc that we use to prep for the show, Iowa was the team that I was researching for my dark horse pick. Obviously, Mark Gronowski is going to be under the spotlight starting this spring, coming in with everything he did at South Dakota State, winning 49 games and an FCS title. He's a bigger guy. Like, I know I talked about this before with Max Brosmer going to Minnesota last year from New Hampshire, all the accolades, but he ultimately was a 5'11" quarterback who I think played well and gave the Gophers an opportunity to win a lot of games, but he wasn't going to be a guy who was just going to carry them. Like, he felt like a baton he's a fill the gap guy who you knew could manage a game and give you a chance to succeed. I think Gronowski, mainly because of his running ability as well, gives Iowa an immediate boost and immediate production that they haven't had out of the quarterback position because of that dual threat. You combine him with Kamari Moulton in the backfield, who split a lot of, like, all the attention went to Caleb Johnson, and rightfully so. But Kamari Moulton was really productive in almost a split backfield last year with Caleb Johnson. And remember now, this will be the second year of Tim Lester's offense in Iowa City. So I think you start to see him get the puzzle pieces he wants. And it's an Iowa team that doesn't have to be great offensively. They have to be good offensively. They're going to be younger at linebacker in 2025 because they've had that lineage of guy after guy after guy. But just because they're younger at linebacker doesn't mean that they're going to take a step back at that position, I feel. Now, look, it is a tough Big Ten schedule. They're going to have Penn State. They're going to have Oregon. They're going to have Indiana. But they're all at home. And that is, from my experiences traveling the Big Ten, Iowa City and Kinnick Stadium is the most difficult road environment to go play in because of the proximity of the seats to the field and the way the stadium is constructed. So I think Iowa, now they're going to need great quarterback play. They're going to need great defense. They're probably going to need to win field position games. And they're one of those teams, a lot like Illinois was last year, even Minnesota was to some extent in 2024, that you're going to play close games. You're just going to. So you're going to need a little luck. You're going to need a little good fortune. But if you can keep yourself in every game, and something they haven't done the last few years, make a big play when it counts, that's why I think Iowa could be that team. And that big play, as we've seen from good Iowa teams before, doesn't always have to come on offense. And I know the hat I'm wearing, you know right where I'm going, but like Cooper DeJean and being able to return a pick six or a punt or a kick, like Iowa, that's their formula for success. So I like Iowa going into 2025 as a potential sleeper team.
What I like too, especially about Gronowski, is he's a guy who, granted, at South Dakota State, right, but still won nearly 50 games in an FCS title. And I think the one thing we can say that's true, I think, in both college basketball and especially college football now, as you see the transfer portal used more and more, lower level success can translate to higher level success. So I think it was easier in the past to write off, oh, that guy played nobody, like, you know, that who cares. But now when you get a guy who's used to winning and winning at a high level, that culture, that confidence, I think even though he's jumping up a massive level from FCS now to the Big Ten, I like it. I do like it here. I'm interested, though. I want to go back to what you said before, actually, you said Iowa. Because you were talking about teams like USC, Michigan, not counting as Cinderellas. Yeah. And I put this on Twitter here, basically, hey, who could you see in the Big Ten being a Cinderella team in 2025? Drop your, teams below, talk about it on the pod. Yeah. And we got a response that had a Michigan flag from Tradus. I think there's a lot of hype and expectations from Michigan here in 2025. I would not count them as a Cinderella team. But I guess when I define Cinderella, I look at more expectations versus history. Like if we were having this conversation this time last year, I think Michigan honestly would have counted for me as a Cinderella team just because I had so little expectations. I thought they're going to be about 6-6. Yeah. And we're talking about Michigan last year. And they went 10-2, 11-1, make a play. Like, I feel like I could call them a Cinderella team. Is it for you? Do you think Cinderella is more about just like the history essentially, or is it about expectations preseason versus reality in the season?
Man, that's a really, really good question because, like, as I debated this, I thought about, do you go back with Curt Cignetti in Indiana again, even though we feel like they're probably going to have a step back for probably the same variety of factors that we discussed with the two teams, Washington and Iowa, that we mentioned having an opportunity to make a run. It's an interesting question, probably just a matter of like semantics here. Like what does one person consider? What does one person not? I think it's really hard to identify a Michigan ever, even going into 2024, as an actual like Cinderella team. It's Michigan. They won the national championship 2 years ago. I think a Cinderella is a team and a program that doesn't have the lineage, tradition, history, resources, expectations. Like Washington, for the last 2 decades, they're pretty, for whatever reason, they don't get mentioned. They don't get mentioned among this same class. But if you start to really do a deep dive on Washington, especially since 2008, they've been more successful than USC. So Washington probably doesn't fit, the slipper probably doesn't fit Washington as well, right?
But that damn size 12, I knew should have got one up.
So I think it's probably just a matter of personal opinion for anyone on the subject. But for me, I can't ever consider one of the blue chip, blue blood programs a Cinderella, regardless, because the expectation, even in a down year, is the expectation really 6-6, or it's, well, we might be down this year, but we're still Michigan. We still think we should be really good. Like there are Michigan fans pretty upset about last season. If they don't beat Ohio State at the end of the year, it's a real bad year.
Right. And you're talking about instead of 8-5, 6-6, maybe 7-6, 6-7. And it's like, there was like, right. We talked about the talent exit off of the national title team. So I think like, that's why I think I would have considered it. And that's like, we're talking about, at least I'm talking about a team in a Cinderella form here that was just in the national title game 2 years ago. And like you said, like Washington has so much history, but I feel like at least when expectations aren't that high, I at least view them differently versus like teams that are always like Ohio State team is always at the top no matter what. That's one I wouldn't consider. Yeah,
I know the reason you're asking this too is like comparing it to basketball. And this is kind of where we started the podcast talking about, because we're talking about March Madness. We're right in the swing of it. Sweet 16 is coming up this week. Elite Eight, who's going to go to the Final Four, is with college basketball now. There's this thought, and I think the sample size is still too small. And it like that's a different animal, a 68 team field, at one game one game take all. So it's just different to me. It's different. Because, and you have all the automatic qualifiers. So no matter what, the America East Conference, the Colonial, they're still going to get representation. They're still, like, they're not going to be eliminated from the dance, at least in the current format of college sports. We'll see how long that lasts. But the reason you bring it up is, can a team that is a Cinderella actually have a chance in college football as we shift into this NIL revenue share, the modern era of college football? Just like people are saying Cinderella is dead in college basketball. Well, can there be Cinderellas in college football?
To make a Final Four in college football, I think no. Because I think there is like a fundamental difference with college basketball and college football where like there is a point in college football where just the strength and the size overtakes. Right. And like just the better players at Ohio State, at Texas, just can overpower a team like Indiana, a team like SMU, et cetera. I think they can make it. Sure.
Can I add one thing right there? Not to interrupt, but I think the biggest thing, and from my experience watching games and being around teams and like working with Penn State the last 5 years, and Maryland's got a good team this year. This might be the year. And that's the one I just point out because I think they've had some good teams with Tunga Vailoa, Roman Hemby, the receivers they've had. I think they've had some good defensive players down there. But it's not just the 22, the starting 22, the 11 on offense, 11 on defense. What it really is the second string guys and the third string guys. The difference between the elite college football programs and the ones that are good or competitive or getting to 7-8 wins isn't that. Now, sure, their starting 22 might not be as good as yours, but relatively can be comparable. But they just don't have the depth to do it. And not only over 4 quarters, but over 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 14 weeks, whatever we're at now, it's just not sustainable. And that to me is the biggest difference from being around the sport and being around teams. Like you can do it 1 week, and now doing it 1 week doesn't change the entire landscape of the season, because 1 week you can get over it now. You know, when Ohio State, didn't they have a real good team that went into Purdue 1 year and lost on the road at Purdue?
Housed.
Yeah, right.
Rondale Moore. Well, it's like 49-20.
That doesn't change your entire season anymore if you're Ohio State.
Right. And the way it did back then.
And it probably doesn't change Purdue's entire season. Like you still have to get to 10, 11 wins, right? So I think the biggest difference is that it's the depth of teams and the quality of player and the depth of the quality of players.
And that's why I think like we have to gauge Cinderella differently here, Greg, because Cinderella in college basketball, it's Sweet 16 run, Elite Eight, Final Four. I think if you just make the playoff and you're in there like Indiana did, like SMU did, that kind of checks a similar box of they got a shot. And also, I don't think like when you see Cinderella get eliminated early, I don't think it's the worst in the world. We saw it in college football, the Final Four of Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame. And we're going to see some great college basketball matchups here in the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight Final Four. Like when you have the best teams left at the end, I think you get some of the best games. And I think we saw some great games in both college football playoff semifinals and the national title game. Like, I think it's also great for college sports when you get Cinderella in there. Okay, maybe she doesn't pull off an upset, but you're included in the dance. And when you see kind of the talent separate itself and you get now the best teams at the end, I think that's what everyone wants. And so I know there's a lot of bitching and complaining about no Cinderella. This is the death of college basketball. You're going to get some great games. I think for college football, the same thing here. Just getting in, I think would constitute being a Cinderella team. I think they're alive. Again, alive to make it. But like we said, in terms of making a run here, we haven't really seen it in college football in any era, right? BCS, back in the voting days, now in the 14 playoff, 12-team playoff, NIL, transfer portal era. I think you're still able, right, to build a team to compete, get to 10 wins, 11 wins. But like I said, there's a huge difference between getting in and then making a run now when there's truly the 12 best teams left in the country and that you got to knock off.
And I think that's a great starting point. We're going to welcome in Jake Trotter from ESPN college football reporter who covered Oklahoma in the Big 12 from 2011 to 2019. He covers the national landscape of college football now, and start with what team can make a Cinderella run, kind of like Indiana, like they came out of nowhere in the Big 10 in 2025. So let's welcome in Jake Trotter from ESPN.
As promised, Jake Trotter, senior college football writer, now is our guest right here on the Still Enrolled podcast. Jake, thank you so much for giving us a few minutes, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. We are doing great. We just finished off a conversation just before you popped on here about Cinderella. That's the big topic right now, at least in college basketball. Is Cinderella dead? Does the slipper still fit? And we, at least Brian and I, both believe like Cinderella is still alive in college football in the sense of like making the college football playoff. You could still get non-traditional powerhouses to make a 12-team field. We both identified a team here in Washington and Iowa. Is there a team in the Big Ten you kind of look at that maybe could make a Cinderella-like run, kind of like Indiana did last year?
I keep waiting for this team to wake up from the dead, and I predicted that they would last year, and they disappointed me. But I look at Nebraska, and this is just not the necessarily the 2025 season, but just in general. You know, they have the facilities, they have the recruiting, at least traditionally. I think they have the quarterback in Dylan Raiola. They have been better defensively, not like the black shirts of old, but better. And if they can just get a little bit more out of the offense, I don't know. Indiana was such a special case, but Nebraska to me is the team I'm watching, and I continue to watch and wait for them to wake up. I mean, they had their first winning season since 2016 last year, and it kind of felt like a disappointment because of the way that they finished down the stretch. The Iowa game was a disaster, but they're going to have a sophomore quarterback in Raiola who has the experience now. I think their playmaking is going to be better than it was last year. So, let's see. I mean, their schedule, I believe, I don't have it in front of me. I don't believe it's terrible. So you're looking at the Big Ten, like who could that be? That's kind of a team I got my eye on.
We know what Matt Rule has done in his third year at Temple and at Baylor. What is a reasonable expectation for a Nebraska team? You mentioned they finally had a winning season last year, but if you look back over the last decade, that's the high water mark for them. What is a reasonable expectation for Matt Rule in year three?
Yeah, it's crazy because I grew up in the old Big 8 country, and Nebraska was basically what Alabama and Georgia are now. Like that was the team that just crushed everybody physically. You couldn't hang with them in the trenches. They had one of the all-time great teams in 96 with Tommy Frazier. And the option in that team just destroyed Florida. So, like Matt, I've known Matt Rule since he was at Baylor. And, that Baylor situation was a debacle, coming out of the scandal there. And, he got them not only to respectability, but like they were competing for, Big 12 championships again. Went to the Panthers, didn't work out there. But, Matt Rule, I think, is a good coach. I think he's proven that. And, this is the time for him, to start producing. I mean, he's got some recruiting classes, strung together now. Again, they've gotten some pretty good talent, but, for whatever reason, they just have not been able to get over the hump. I wasn't at that Ohio State game last year, but, I remember watching it and I was like, this is the Nebraska I've been waiting to see, tough defensively, making enough plays on offense and hanging in with, the best team in the country. They're just so inconsistent. I think it was the Illinois game early on in the year. That might have been like a Friday night or Thursday night game.
Yeah.
And they had that game won and just fell apart down the stretch. And I think that really changed the trajectory of their season. So if they can get off to a good start, maybe this is the year. I'm not going to predict them making the playoff. There's too many other good teams in the Big Ten, Penn State in particular, but, don't write off Ohio State, Michigan, or Oregon with the talent they have coming back, even if it is a little bit of inexperience. But, there is a window for someone in the Big Ten to make a move, because you look at Ohio State, freshman quarterback, you look at Michigan, potentially a freshman quarterback. I mean, guys that are, super talented, but, are freshmen. There is Oregon is starting a new quarterback this year. There's an opportunity, for someone to make a real move. And, again, Nebraska's kind of the team with the continuity at quarterback and coach that might be able to finally pull it off.
Speaking of a sleeping giant, Jake, I feel like that also could be applied to USC and all the talent they've had and the history they've had. And you're kind of waiting for that under Lincoln Riley take that jump to where they're a college football playoff contender and a national title contender every single year. Before your role now as a senior writer, you were actually on the Oklahoma beat. You've covered Lincoln Riley both as an OC and a head coach for 4 years down in Norman. We've seen USC make changes this offseason at the front office. They've gotten results in terms of recruiting, and it looks like they're starting to build their team in a Big Ten mold, which looks promising right now. But the big question I keep coming back to with USC in terms of making that jump and believing them is Lincoln Riley truly a good enough coach to get USC to be a national title college football playoff contender every single year? You've seen the man, you've covered the man. Do you think Lincoln Riley still has that capability in him of being the coach of a program that's consistently top 10?
Yeah, it's amazing we're having that conversation because when USC hired Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma, it was perceived to be such a coup. I actually only covered, because I moved to the NFL in 2019. So I think I covered 2 years of Lincoln Riley and only one, or maybe it was two with him as the the head coach. And at that point, I was covering other college football as well. But I know Lincoln and just a brilliant offensive mind. Like he is, the run he had at quarterback at Oklahoma, and then even to some degree at USC with Caleb Williams in particular. Like the guy knows offense. Like they have that track record speaks for itself. When he came to USC, they were in a transition phase. And, my concern for them when they move to the Big Ten is physically, were they going to be able to hang in? It's one thing to, beat people 60-40 in the Big 12, beat people 60-40 in the Pac-12. You can't do that in the Big Ten. Like the defenses are too good. The defensive lines are too imposing. You have to win games in different ways. And, after the LSU win last year, I was pretty optimistic about USC because I thought LSU and LSU kind of had a down year, but, I think LSU is going to be a real factor this season with Nussmeier and company. But I thought after that win, maybe USC is finally turning the corner and, they didn't look overwhelmed physically in that game, against a top tier SEC opponent. And I was at the USC Michigan game. Was that like week 2 or week 3? Week 2, week 3, something like, yeah, maybe it was week 2 because Michigan, I think, had beaten Fresno the week before. And Michigan couldn't throw the ball that season, particularly when they had Alex Orji at quarterback, who, they would rarely throw the ball more than 8 or 9 times a game when he was back there. You knew Michigan was going to run the ball. USC got off to a really good start in that game. They led throughout. And when it mattered, on that game-winning drive that Michigan had, they couldn't tackle Khalil Mullings. I mean, everybody knew Michigan was going to run the ball between the tackles. All USC had to do was not give up a 60-yard run, and that's exactly what happened. Mullings broke like 4 tackles, gets down inside the red zone. They punch it in from there, and I thought that was a really deflating loss for USC. And, they had some chances last year. I don't know how many games they lost by like a single score. It felt like every game they played the rest of the year, they lost by like 2, 3, whether it was, somebody like Penn State, some lesser teams in the Big Ten.
Maryland.
So I'm curious to see what they look like in the trenches this year now with another season to recruit. They lost, some really good skill players to the portal. They're going to have a new quarterback or a relatively new quarterback this year, and so we'll see. But I mean, right now, the vibes out of USC I think are murky. It didn't look like a team that was having a ton of fun last year. It seemed like after every week, Lincoln Riley was kind of, quipping back and forth with their media there about, the way things went or decisions made in the game. So, they've got to figure out a way to close games. And I think if they can just tackle better, we've been saying about USC and when Riley was at Oklahoma, forever, if they can tackle better, they've got a chance to be better. But, I'm of the opinion, I just got to see it to believe it because, I was at that Michigan game and that was a disaster of a performance defensively down the stretch.
You mentioned Penn State a couple of times, and it may be unfair because of what Ohio State and Oregon have proven to be the last couple of seasons. But I think the overwhelming consensus is this is kind of their year. They're the team to beat. They return that nucleus, even though they lose Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. Jim Knowles replaces Tom Allen as the defensive coordinator. Covering college football, not just the Big Ten, but nationally, we've talked about Penn State in the Big Ten. Where do they stack up nationally among SEC teams, other teams across the country as favorites going into 2025, 2026?
Well, they made the Final Four last year. That wasn't by accident, although they got a super favorable draw in the playoff with SMU and then Boise State, and then, had every opportunity to beat Notre Dame. I think the frustrating thing when you watch and follow Penn State is they get in these top 5, top 10 matchups, and they just cannot win. I think James Franklin's record, just as the head coach at Penn State, is like 1-15 against top 5 opponents, and a lot of those, Penn State is, right there. Like they are, highly ranked themselves, and they just can't win that game. Couldn't beat Ohio State last year, even though Will Howard threw a pick six like on the third play of the game. Couldn't beat Notre Dame when it looked like they were kind of in command until the end. So that's going to be the question this year. Like, can they win those games? Because if Penn State's ever going to win the Big Ten and potentially get to the national championship, it's going to be this season. You look at Michigan, you look at Ohio State. I just mentioned it before. New quarterbacks, a lot of inexperience. Mm-hmm. Penn State has the most experienced quarterback in the Big Ten, maybe all of college football, Drew Aller, who, did not play well in that Notre Dame game, but had a really good season overall. He continues to get better. I think the more faith that they put in him will help him. It seemed like at times last year they were a little bit gimmicky with, their backup quarterback, Broke Pabilla, they would put in the game as a change of pace. They put Tyler Warren at quarterback sometimes. Like, I think they were at their best when they just let Drew Aller play and trusted him to make the throws. That backfired in the Notre Dame game, but at some point, you got to trust your quarterback to win the national championship. And that's what Ohio State did with Will Howard last year. Penn State's all in. They went out and got Jim Knowles, as you mentioned. They got Andy Koltanecki, offensive coordinator from Kansas a couple of years ago. They have maybe the best running back duo coming back, and Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They've got talent defensively. I think, to me on the field, the big question is like, who is going to catch passes from Drew Aller? Because, their receiver position has just been super underwhelming lately, and they've got to be better there to stretch defenses downfield and give Aller more help. But I think it's just going to ultimately come down to James Franklin in these big games, and can he outcoach Ryan Day or Sharon Moore or Dan Lanning or whoever it may be? Because that's just been the Achilles heel of that program. Penn State has won a ton of games under James Franklin. They've been super consistent throughout. But, I think if they don't win the Big Ten, to me, this would be a disappointment because of what is happening in the Big Ten right now. the flagship programs rebuilding or retooling, and you've got Drew Aller, who could be a first-round pick at quarterback next year. So this is a huge year for James Franklin and Penn State, and they have the pieces to be a real factor in the national championship conversation.
I want to follow up on that. Can I follow up on that really quick, Ryan? You mentioned not getting over the hump in those big games. Is it coaching? Is it talent? Like when you watch, is it just bad luck? Like they're there, they're in the games, but why, in your opinion, are they not getting the results at the end of the day, even though they've had plenty of chances to do so?
Yeah, I mean, there's different reasons for why those games have gone the way that they did. The Notre Dame game is just, I don't know. Listen, it was a bad decision or a bad throw by Drew Aller, but again, you're putting him in that position, and I think that you look at the Ohio State game last year. They just, I think they lost their way a little bit offensively, and they could not, make key plays in that game. And Ohio State, even though they didn't score a lot of points, Chip Kelly just called a masterful game compared to what Penn State countered with. So you watch Penn State, and like even the Illinois game last year, which I was at, it's just like frustrating to watch them at times because they allow teams to hang around sometimes that shouldn't be. Like they should have beaten Illinois 35-7, and yet it was like a 14-7 game in the fourth quarter, a result of some of the decisions they made that were, that were puzzling. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're gonna give me the through line, it's got to be James Franklin. He's the coach. It's his program, and when you lose that many big games, when you have the talent to go toe to toe with virtually anyone in college football, it's got to fall on the head coach. And they just got to be more clutch, and they've got to be, they have got to, come up with the game plans that are going to let their players thrive in those moments.
And they're going to have the opportunity this year, Jake, with both Ohio State and Oregon on their schedule. Oregon coming to Happy Valley early in the year. So James Franklin has two big chances this year to kind of knock that moniker, or at least quiet down a lot of people upset with him by winning at least one, maybe both of those games. And it's fascinating. It's crazy to say, like, both those teams are fascinating because they're obviously so good, but I'm intrigued because of what you mentioned before of like, they have obviously a lot of talent on both rosters. Oregon and Ohio State, they're doing a great job recruiting in the transfer portal, but a lot of that talent's unproven either just on the college level or at the respective schools. When you kind of look at both those programs, Oregon and Ohio State, is there any, like, with so much changeover and so much loss of production from two of the best teams in college football last year, is there either one of those teams you kind of look at and saying, you know what, we're not really talking about it now, but there's a chance maybe we're looking at a 9-3 kind of down year where maybe one of those teams doesn't make the playoff here in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to come down to quarterback play. Ohio State, I mean, they lost, so many key defensive players. I think they've only got 3 starters coming back on that side of the ball. Offensively, they've got some linemen back, but basically the entire, skill contingent outside Tate and Jeremiah Smith are gone as well. I will say this about Ohio State. They might have, I don't know, the 2 best players coming back in college football. It's a pretty good place to start. True. With Jeremiah Smith, who, I've had scouts tell me he would be the number 1 pick in this draft if he were eligible. Like, that's how tantalizing of a prospect he is. And in Caleb Downs, I mean, you saw what he did in the playoff. I mean, he was unbelievable in the way they unleashed him, kind of that like shallow free safety role. He was terrific. So that they've got, foundational pieces to retool around. And yeah, like Julian Sand hasn't played much, but he's a former, 5-star quarterback, and they've got some good transfers coming in as well. I think we have Ohio State as our number 1 team going into the season right now at ESPN, which is crazy considering the production that they lost, but the combination of those superstars and then just the talent and kind of the track record with Ryan Day in all games that, are not against Michigan, it's hard to get to bet against them. Same thing with Oregon. You lose a guy like Dylan Gabriel. I mean, that guy played a ton of football. He had a terrific year. They had the horrible performance against Ohio State, but They've got Dante Moore, coming from UCLA, again, highly touted. Evan Stewart, who played last year, is going to probably take over the number one receiver role. Former Texas A&M transfer, another former 5-star guy. So they've got guys coming back as well. But again, it kind of goes back to Penn State. You look at Oregon, you look at Ohio State, you look at Michigan, and there's some question marks there. The talent is inarguable, but we just haven't seen it, and we have seen it with Penn State. So I haven't picked the league right now, or as of yet, but there's a lot of reasons to think that Penn State could be the favorite in the Big Ten just based on the experience that they have.
Jake, as we wrap up with you here, as you had an opportunity to watch the first season of this 12-team playoff, the new look conferences, the mega conferences that we're kind of trending towards here, what was your impression now that we've had a month or two to step back? Like, it's college football. It's 24/7. It's 365. So I don't know if there's ever downtime to reflect on it. But as we saw it play out, and now that we're removed from it for a couple of months, what are your takeaways, impressions, overall thoughts on what last year looked like? I know it might not look like that for long, but what was your impression of how college football, the 2024 version of college football, and the season played out?
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. And my favorite part of it is that it put more teams in different parts of the country in play late in the season. We'd gotten to a point with the 14 playoff where there was only like 7 campuses that mattered. It was like Tuscaloosa, Columbus, Ann Arbor, South Bend, Norman,
Athens,
Austin late in the game, Clemson. Like there was only like eight teams going into the season that you felt like had any shot to be in playoff contention. And by the time we got to November, there's only like 6 or 7 teams that even mathematically had a chance. And this year, you had Iowa State playing meaningful games. You had Colorado, BYU, Arizona State playing meaningful games. You had Indiana. You had Ohio State, which in previous iterations of the playoff or the BCS, like they'd have been done after that Michigan game. I mean, who knows what that would have looked like, for them and Ryan Day. So I just felt like it opened up college football. It de-regionalized it in a really positive way. And I think it made the regular season, especially down the stretch, more fun. And, those first round playoff games were a lot of fun. I was at the Ohio State Tennessee game, and that was an amazing atmosphere. Tennessee had like 30,000 fans at that game, which it was weird to see that much orange in Ohio Stadium. The only, I think, issue, and I think everybody's aware of it, is, all right, maybe you don't get the automatic bye just because you win your conference. You should get in if you win the Big 12 or the ACC, but maybe you're not the number 3 seed if you're the top group of 5. So I think that just giving the top 4 teams in the rankings those byes will probably make the first round games a little bit more competitive than what they were. But otherwise, I thought it was a smashing success, and I thought it was great for college football that more people were involved than we had seen in a very, very long time.
I totally agree. I loved it. I thought it was, again, outside of the seating, I thought it was perfect for all the reasons you just outlined. And so, unfortunately, we have to go here, at least for my last question, Jake, is we had a good thing in college football. Looks like that's going to go away in the sense of a format change, probably looking at a 14-team expansion. And it feels like inevitable that we're going to have automatic bids for the Big Ten and the SEC of 4 teams each, most likely. You're kind of seeing where the playoff is headed here in 2026 and beyond. Do you look at it as good for college football? Like, sure, the Big Ten and the SEC are the most dominant teams, but like, is it these automatic qualifiers, basically them running the college football playoff here? Is that a good thing for the sport going forward, you think?
No, it kind of goes back to what I was saying. We're going back to regionalizing college football again, where only certain people have access to winning a national championship or competing in the playoff. It kind of smacks of insecurity from the 2 major conferences. Like, you're probably going to have, 4 automatic bids anyway. And the years you don't, you probably don't deserve them. Like in no way did Alabama deserve to be in over SMU based on the way the season went. I mean, they got beat 24-3 in Norman late in the year by a very average Oklahoma team. And so, I think it would have been a shame if Alabama had gotten in over SMU just because the SEC had so many automatic bids. So I don't like it. But I think we are, kind of underscores we're moving toward closer and closer an NFL model where you got your AFC, you got your NFC, you've got, free agency and salary cap maybe at some point, which, I think is inevitable. But again, if you want to just Big Ten, SEC, play each other and keep everybody else out, fine. But in the meantime, I don't think that, eliminating, programs that deserve to be in based on the way that they perform is good for college football.
Agreed. I think the insecurity is perfectly said. I agree with you. And fortunately, it looks like what we say and our agreements will not matter here in the future of the sport. Jake, thank you so much for the time. This was awesome. Really do appreciate your insight.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Again, huge thanks to Jake Trotter, senior college football writer for ESPN. And Ryan, the question I followed up on, because look, I'm embedded with it all the time with Penn State. You're a Penn State alum. You're not shy about your Penn State fandom. Is why can't I like to hear it from an outside perspective, and not that I don't agree with the outside perspective, because I think James Franklin's put his team in a position to win, and ultimately sometimes players just have to go make plays. I think they've had some bounces go against them. I think they've had some calls go against them. Like, I don't say, oh, they can't get over it. I don't think Jake was saying this, but I think there's like sometimes this belief they can't get over the hump because they don't have the coach to get over the hump. Well, I think a lot of the years between 2018 to 2023, they didn't have the talent to get over the hump. And ultimately, they had to fight and scratch and claw just to get to where they were. Now, ideally, if you're a Penn State fan, in some of those situations, you assume, talent or not, you're going to find a way to outcoach, out-scheme, create your own luck, create your own bounce to win one of those games. But I think it's always fascinating as someone who's embedded with it all the time to get the outside perspective on it. But from my experience, I think what James has done, the word Jake used there is consistency. What James Franklin's done at Penn State in a sport where consistency is almost impossible. Like, look at LSU this past season, right? If you look at Michigan, look at USC, like, consistency is a very, very difficult thing to achieve. I think James Franklin deserves a lot of credit for how he's gotten Penn State to consistently 10, 11 or more now wins in a single season, year after year after year, and being on that precipice. But I always find it interesting to get that perspective as to why someone thinks they can't. Like, to me, it's a combination of circumstances, but why can't they just get over that hump when it seems like something that could be so easy to do? I don't think it actually is as easy as saying it for it to happen.
When you say consistent, at least from my perspective, I feel like the one underlying factor I could use here in a lot of these losses is that they're consistently conservative. They play not to lose instead of playing to win. And I think when you add that along with, like you said, there is a talent gap here between them and Michigan in the last few years, them and Ohio State, right, as well. Like, I think that those two lead to you losing more of those games more often than not. And I think we saw since the Ohio State game a switch.
Yeah, I think they changed that. And then, you know what? Sometimes, like that Minnesota game, you're going to be the benefactor of it. But you know what? When you're throwing the ball from your own 25 and trying to stretch the field, like the Notre Dame game, you know what? It can go wrong too. And guys have to make plays. And ultimately, even last year, as good as they were, their strength was running the football and utilizing Tyler Warren and using Drew Aller, who's a great quarterback, my estimation, a great quarterback, but he's really effective when he can use his legs. Like, they weren't going to be a drop back and win team primarily because the wide receiver position. So for Penn State, it's not a coaching thing why they didn't get over the hurdle last year. It's ultimately they didn't have a guy on the outside. It wasn't Trey Wallace. It wasn't Amari Evans. They didn't have a guy on the outside that could step up and make a big catch or get any separation or make a big play. You know, Notre Dame had that in that game. Penn State didn't. And that's where they're hoping. And from early reports through through winter ball, and Penn State starts spring practice today, Tuesday, March 25th. Their first practice is this afternoon. Kyron Hudson's kind of been looks like he could be that guy. And I know everyone's excited about Ross. Early returns are good. But it's kind of a wait and see. And I think that's the storyline in the spring at Penn State. It's not Jim Knowles. It's not James Franklin. It's not Drew Aller. If they're healthy, it's those receivers. But I will say this too. I think they have depth at running back. They have depth on the offensive line. Their defense, and they've got some real good young talent in the secondary. It's not so much secondary. Linebacker position and defensive line, they can ill afford an injury to a key guy at those positions. If there's one thing to watch spring, summer, camp, Penn State, early season, Zane Durant's got to be healthy. Tony Rojas has to be healthy for him. Those positions, they need younger guys to step up to build that depth like they've had in the secondary. They really need that in their front seven coming out of the spring.
Like you said, Penn State starts their spring ball today. Most Big Ten schools either already underway or about to start spring football here. So I figure what we do, Tripp, over the next few weeks here is give you some spring intel. Tell you what we're watching, tell you what we're hearing here as well, and give you some news and notes on a few teams that you should get updates on as spring ball is underway. A big one everyone's kind of looking at here, Michigan. What does Bryce Underwood look like? How is he transforming now from being the number one overall recruit to now possibly being their week one starter for the Wolverines? Well, Sherrone Moore spoke in the media recently, Tripp, and I want to read you some of these quotes here because I think it's interesting is he did talk about the transition right now of Bryce Underwood. He was asked about his transition overall to college, and Sherrone Moore said, quote, "Early enrollment is great in general, not only for football, but for school. Be able to handle school and know where your classes are. He's done well and works his tail off. He's in here early and he's in here late." Interesting because also he spoke about Mikey Keene, right? The transfer quarterback from Fresno State, a lot of experience here as well. He said about Keene, quote, "Played a lot of football. Talk about a guy that knows the game. Experience is big." And I want to add those two quotes together to really kind of bring the big one here because it is going to be a quarterback battle. This is not Underwood's job that's given to him. He has to earn it. So speaking of naming a quarterback, Sherrone Moore said, quote, "The guy that makes the most plays and has command of the team. Can't just be the offense. It's both sides of the ball. We'll know when that happens. We're not in a rush to make that decision. The QB room is together." That at least tells me, I feel like early lean feels like Mikey Keene. Talking about a guy who knows the offense, knows not only just the playbook, but knows the entire team. He's talking about experience. What are you laughing at?
Because it's March 25th and you're reading into one quote from Sherrone Moore and declaring Michigan's starting quarterback. I mean, that is the most Hickey thing you could do. That is the most Hickey thing you could do.
I did not plant the flag and say that Mikey Keene guaranteed to be the week one starter. I said early lean. It feels like right now what Sherrone Moore is prioritizing works in favor of a guy who's played a lot of football, who can have command of the huddle, command of the team, because he's been there before. Not at Michigan, but in general.
I think this is a real competition. And I think perhaps easing Bryce Underwood into the role could be a successful formula for Michigan. And there is in no world that Sherrone Moore is just going to say, Bryce Underwood, it's your job. I think both will play in 2025. I think both will have a significant role at some point in 2025.
Also agree.
But ultimately, everyone knows this is Bryce Underwood's job. Like at some point, it's his job. So what Sherrone Moore is doing is setting up a competition. He's laying the foundation for Keene to be a part of this Michigan football team, and a big part of it. But ultimately, it is Bryce Underwood's job.
I don't. Everything you said, I totally agree with. All I'm looking at here, because I think fans care about who's going to be the week one starter. I think a lot of fans assume it's going to be Bryce Underwood. Just when you hear Sherrone Moore say on what he's looking at, that will help him determine who will be the starter, I think just week one, when you talk about experience, when you talk about knowing both sides of the ball, that feels like it works better towards a guy who's been in college football for a few years. That's all. Last thing I'll read from Sherrone Moore, and this should be a positive. I mean, the good news is it's really impossible to be any worse in terms of explosiveness on offense than Michigan was last year. But Sherrone Moore did say, quote, feels like we're progressing and trying to get better at football. There are things that we've done and haven't done. I feel like we'll be explosive running and passing, but we'll see in the fall. There is a theme in the Big Ten. It does feel like there's a lot of inexperienced players all across the conference here that are going to have to step up. There's not much proven commodity, proven talent in the conference, especially at skill positions across most teams in this conference. Michigan is no different, and that's one where, again, at least for them, it's impossible to be any worse. It's impossible to be any worse, period. So that he should deliver on that promise. But as Sherrone Moore said at the end, we'll see what it actually looks like here come fall ball. Illinois, biggest question we talked about them for the spring here is how do they replace the receiver production they lost in Pat Bryant and Zachary Frankel? And the good news is, Brett Bielema, speaking to the media recently, he said that the three receivers the Illini brought in, Braden Trimble, true freshman, Hudson Clement over from West Virginia, Justin Bowick as well from Ball State, all broad jumped, Tripp, 10 feet 5 or better, which would have been a record in the first year with the Illini. Now, how does that translate to football? I really can't tell you. But the good news is here is at least you got a proven guy in Clement who had over 700 yards at West Virginia last year. Bowick played again at Ball State, experienced receiver. And if you can get a true freshman receiver coming in Trimble, 6'1", 175, I think for Illinois to make the playoff here, they do need a lot more production. Kind of what we're talking about from Penn State at the receiver position, experienced quarterback, experienced running back room, unproven talent at receiver. At least from the physical traits, I think there's a reason to be optimistic here for the Illini.
And that's what Bryant and Franklin both brought to the table last year. And I think was a big part of Luke Altmaier's success for Illinois. And he made he was a high reward, low risk quarterback last year, which is something he wasn't over his first couple of years in Champaign. Next program we want to talk about, Minnesota. A program record 17 players participated in their pro day. The Gophers aim for their 6th straight NFL draft with a first. I did not know this. Their 6th straight NFL draft with a first or second round pick. Only Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia have longer active streaks. So is this some momentum for PJ Fleck and the development that they've had at Minnesota? We spent a lot of time a couple of weeks ago talking about Drake Lindsey coming in, replacing Max Brosmer. Brosmer had really, really good things to say about Lindsey. They've had all this turnover on their staff. They've had some turnover on their roster. Some really good players have transferred out, but 62% of their production is back in 2025. Middle of the pack, 7th in the Big Ten, 40th nationally. Offensively, 50% returning. Again, a little bit lower there, 83rd nationally. And they do have to replace a lot of their offensive line. But even with this change and some of the changes they've had on staff, when you start to take a deeper dive into Minnesota, the same way we did this year during the regular season, like, hey, these guys are pretty good. They're pretty competitive. They're really, to me, outside of your top 6, 7 Big Ten teams that we've discussed time and time again, that group, Illinois, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota is actually a part of that conversation. And PJ Fleck, I think, has gotten some heat because everyone's waiting for them to really break through. But ultimately, he's consistently, there's the word again, done a pretty good job there in Minneapolis. He's a guy, I think you love him or hate him. And he's not shy to be who he is. But ultimately, you start to dive into it and do a deeper look at Minnesota. Yeah, I think they do need to win 10 games at some point, probably. But not bad, especially where they fit in the current landscape of the Big Ten.
And you may be wondering yourself, why are Tripp and Hickey talking about pro days? We're in spring ball here. But I think what you outlined is the fact that Fleck is one of the most underrated, maybe the most underrated talent developer in the Big Ten, and maybe in all of college football, to where you talk about what they lose offensively and where they rank. I think you can feel optimistic and give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense of, while you are losing a lot of production, especially on the offensive side of the football, PJ Fleck has proven in his time at Minnesota that he can develop guys and take a 2-star, make him a 4-star. a 3-star player into like a 4.5, 5-star kind of guy. And I don't think there are many better, consistent talent developers that take a guy and make him exponentially better. As a senior year compared to where he was a freshman. I don't think many coaches do that better than Fleck. And I think you have to at least feel positive about that if you're a Gophers fan going forward here of, well, you are losing a lot. 2025 may not be a drop-off. 2026 as well. It could be even better based on his ability to develop and make guys better at the end coming in or compared to when they do come in here in terms of recruiting rankings in the portal here as well.
Well, I know there's some news coming out of Columbus, Piscataway, like Penn State. We just said they start their spring practice today. This is what's called a tease. Next time coming up on the Still Enrolled podcast, we'll check in on Ohio State, Penn State favorites in the Big Ten, Oregon, news and notes from across the Big Ten as well. This was fun today. Jake was an awesome, awesome guest. He was an awesome guest.
He was. I think we hit a lot of big, interesting topics here across the conference. Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun. Jake was awesome here. So make sure you do read him at ESPN and check out his work there as well, because he does a great job covering. He's in Big Ten country, kind of in Ohio and Columbus area. So he's reporting nationally, but really does do a lot of reporting and writing on the Big Ten as well. So that's a guy that we should definitely have again on the pod because he knows what he's talking about. And again, I think it was great insight here and really gets us. I mean, again, I feel like I say this every pod trip. So I apologize for repeating myself. I'm so jacked up for the season. I'm already ready for 2025. Get me to September. Well, I think it's like August 31st. Get me to August 31st. Let's go. But on that note, like you said, we'll wrap up the pod here. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you do subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your pod. Just type in Still Enrolled. There we are. Can be found on every platform imaginable that you consume podcasts. Always appreciate your support. Have a great rest of your week. Best of luck to your brackets. And we'll talk to you next week right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.